Okay, so why don't you start with the greeting, Anna?
Sounds great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Sanchez, and I'm the Director for the Department of Senior Affairs for the City of Albuquerque. Today, I'm excited as we present our fourth presentation on falls prevention. All this month, we have been focusing on how to be able to keep you safe during this time where you are at home more, but we want to make sure that you're safe and healthy. And we're excited to be here with our friends from the New Mexico Coalition for Falls Prevention, and we really want to be able to give you this information to be able to stay safe during this time. I'm excited to be able to be here with some wonderful experts in the field, and with that, I will turn it over to today's presenters.
Good morning, my name is Athena Valeria Hirschfeld and I'm a paramedic with Albuquerque Fire Rescue. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you get a little bit more about what we're going to be talking today. All right, can everyone see? It says be brave with heart. Fantastic. As Anna was mentioning, we have great partners for this series of presentations, and these are some of the ones that we've been able to work with. I want to thank particularly Janet. She is the director, or I'm not quite sure what your title is, of the Falls Coalition, but really working to get all of this together. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, these are some of my resources. I've done a lot of research trying to get what's missing. But before we get into the actual class, I wanted to talk a little bit about why the fire department has a fall prevention program. I'm part of what we call our HEART program, which is the Home Engagement Alternative Response Team. We were established in July of 2018, and there's three main programs. One is our repeat patient program, one is our fall prevention program, and one is our harm reduction. So to kind of give you an idea of why this was initiated by our current administration, and we're roughly the size of Colorado Springs, and we run, last year we ran over 100,000 calls. Colorado Springs ran about 40,000 calls. So we have a huge problem in the sense of people's health needs aren't being met. And so our program, HEART, was initiated to start trying to solve those problems, have a greater discussion. How do we get people to have more of the solutions for their long-term issues, right? We have a lot of chronic issues. People go to the ER for them. And so we're trying to get them connected with better resources, which comes into our repeat patient program. Now, when we talk about our fall prevention program, it stems from some of this data right here. So this is for the month of August. We ran 6,487 medical calls. Of that, 724 were falls. That doesn't include syncope or unconsciousness, fainting, anything like that. These are just the calls that came in as actual falls. So that's a little over 11% of the medical calls, and our total call volume, it's just around 10%, a little under. And so our other calls include, what most people think of the fire department as returning or responding to fires, but actually most of our calls, as you can see, are medical calls. And so when we respond, 911's called, and we respond, and we ask what happened, tell me how you fell. Very rarely does anyone want to say they fell. They say, I tripped, I got a little dizzy, I just had some weakness, I slid or slipped out of my chair, I was walking and I got a little distracted. So for us, falls are a huge issue, but a lot of the concern is that the public isn't really identifying that they're a fall risk or that what's happening is a fall. And so in HEART, we wanted to initiate a program and start looking at how to help solve some of these issues. For the fall program, I am the fall prevention coordinator. And so we have two components of it. We have our home modification program, which we've been able to partner with the Department of Senior Affairs. And we help do some installs of things like grab bars, toilet seats, bed rails, shower handles, things like that. And we partner, like I said, with Senior Affairs and kind of take the burden off of them. We have a licensed carpenter who I manage and help make sure he has people we can go help. And the second part is our fall recovery program, which I was teaching at senior centers, but once COVID hit, then we stopped doing in-person classes. So I'm excited to be able to bring some of that information to you today. All right, so like I said, when we show up in a 911 situation, you can get anywhere between 2 and 10 people in that room. Albuquerque has what we call a 2-tier system, and that is we have the fire department that responds, and then we have the transporting agency, which in Albuquerque is Albuquerque Ambulance. So depending on what type of call and the severity of the call, you can get 2 people from Albuquerque Fire, 2 people from Albuquerque Ambulance, up to 6 or 7 people from Albuquerque Fire, and 2 or 3 people from Albuquerque Ambulance. And so that creates a little bit more of a chaotic situation in the sense that now you have, 4 people, 10 people in your living room or your bedroom, wherever you may happen to have an emergency, and trying to get information to what's going on makes it a little bit more difficult. So what I'd like to do now is kind of discuss what is a fall, right? So there's a lot of different definitions out there. We have the Webster's definition, which is any event that leads to an unplanned, unexpected contact with a supporting surface. This can be the floor, it can be a counter, a piece of furniture. I like to think of it as a gravity check, right? You're walking along and didn't quite realize gravity was as strong as it was right there. Falls are happening all the time to all different types of people, different ages, different things, but when does it become a consequence or more of a concern has a lot to do with our fear of it as well as the injury associated with it. We do get calls for toddlers that have fallen, bumped their head, fell out of bed, whatever it may be. But the majority of our calls tend to be more for, I would say, people 60 plus and falls. With that in mind,
Athena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is it possible to change your the view so that you have just one slide instead of a slide in the next slide? I received a request, and it may help if someone's using a smaller electronic device to be able to easily see your the slide that you have that you're speaking on.
is that what's showing? Is it showing both?
It's showing both, yeah.
Okay, on mine it's showing the big one. Let me change that.
Okay, thank you. And sorry to interrupt, but that'll be helpful to some of the participants. Terrific. Excellent.
Okay. I thought that's what I had. All my practice and that wasn't it.
Well, best laid plans, but thank you. And thank you to the participant who pointed that out.
All right, so hopefully this is easier. All right. So the next portion that we have is the acronym that we have here in HEART, and it's called Be Brave, and it's really a fall recovery plan. And for this, it is an acronym that are things that we can do before a fall, during the fall, and after a fall. And it's kind of, the more we practice it, the better at it we'll become. The B in brave, or in B rather, stands for brainstorm. The E is for execute. And then the B for brave is breathe. The R is remain positive. The A, assess body and surroundings. V, venture to safety. And E, engage health. And we're going to go over all of these. So when we talk about brainstorming, we want to think about things that we can do proactively. A lot of the issues, if you will, that we come across in 911 is that no one's expecting to see or to have an emergency, right? Accidents are called accidents for a reason. You don't really expect them to happen. The same with emergencies. So one of the forms that we actually worked with Senior Affairs to get is what we call the Vial of Life. This is a free form that you can just download from the Vial of Life, but we've been able to get permission and modify this so that this is for Albuquerque residents in particular. Now, this form, you have the full form on the right, and then you have the partial form on the left. So the full form on the right has a lot of different things. Things like your past medical history, your current medical conditions, your medications, allergies, your doctor's name, the last time you were hospitalized, your health insurance and hospital of choice, and your emergency contacts. The part on the left is the top part of the form, and I wanted to go over a little bit of this just because it isn't always clear. And I have images for the rest of this as well. So we have your basic demographics. So your name, date of birth, social security number, street address. Your address isn't as important because we're responding to your house typically. But definitely date of birth and your name, social security number are highly important for us, as well as if you have hearing or vision difficulties. There's a number of times where we respond to a 911 call and we don't know that the person's deaf or they have visual impairments, and we just can't get a full assessment as to what's going on with the individual. And it makes it difficult for us, and it's frustrating for them. Up here in yellow, we also have two components. One is DNR and one is advanced directives, and if you have either of those. So when we talk about a DNR, let me go to the next one. When we talk about the DNR, there are two different types of DNR, if you will. DNR stands for do not resuscitate. The do not resuscitate is active when someone's heart is not beating and they are no longer breathing. Typically in advanced directives we have this, but the form that you see ahead of you right now is called the EMS DNR. And you can have those other types of DNR, but if you call 911 or someone calls 911 because your heart's not beating and you're not breathing, as 911 providers, as medical professionals, we have to start doing CPR and heroic life-saving measures. So having this form is very important. You have to get it signed by your physician, and it kind of talks about what it is and what's going on. This form can be voided by anyone, by any family member if they tear it up or just say, no, we want you to do something. So just know that by having it, it does not necessarily mean we won't do anything if you're wanting it to be done. The other thing that we asked about was advanced directives. Now your advanced directives is kind of an umbrella and it has a few different options in there. One of them, like I mentioned, has the DNR. It also has what we call your healthcare power of attorney. So your POA is something that some people have in place, but not everyone does. And I encourage a lot of people to have this because it should be someone that you have talked about what you want any medical decisions to be. Should you have a stroke and you're paralyzed? Do you want to go to a nursing home? Do you not want to go to a nursing home? What are your wishes for the life that you want to live? Your POA typically only comes into effect when you are unable to make your medical decisions. So if you're unconscious, unresponsive, that POA typically falls to a spouse or child if they happen to be there, but we don't know necessarily who that is. So I'm going to go back a couple slides because it's what do we do with those forms once we fill them out. The vial of life is intended to kind of be in a central location. So typically, if you have an old one, the typical model was that it was in like a big plastic, almost pill bottle looking thing, but it was very difficult to get information in and out. So now what we're doing is putting it in just a sandwich bag, putting a vial of life sticker on it, and then putting it either on the fridge or in the fridge, as long as we know that it's there. So then the question becomes, how do we know that you have one? And we know that by putting, as you can see here, there's a little red dot on the picture of this mailbox. And that is a sticker, it's the same sticker that you put on the packet. And that sticker says that there's a vial of life inside. And that would indicate that if 911 shows up and the fire department's there, we see that red sticker, we can start looking in the fridge, on the fridge, in the freezer. We tend to be very nosy when we need to be. So if we know to look for it, we can do that. Within this packet of the vial of life, you want to put in the vial of life form, which was this form here. And then you also want to put in any other supplemental material. So that can be your DNR, it can be a copy of your advanced directives, it could be a picture of yourself, it could be anything that you think is important for us to know. It could be if you're diabetic, what your normal sugar ranges are, so that we know if you are unconscious, unresponsive, but your sugar is 120, but you're normally at 200 to 400, then we know that maybe you are hypoglycemic, even though clinically you're not. So anything that can give the field providers a better understanding of what's going on and who you are in your medical condition is going to make the emergency situation a little less stressful. All right. One other thing that we want to brainstorm is checking for safety. So we're all at our homes, or at least in our places of employment. And so I just want you to take a moment and picture your house. What's the normal routes that you go to? Do you come in the front door and hang out in the living room? Are you more just in the bedroom? Do you avoid the kitchen? Is the kitchen a mess so you don't go in there? How big are your doorways? And just take a minute. So I'm looking of my house, I'm picturing what I do when I come in and thinking about what are the potential hazards. Now, when we talk about checking for safety, right, it can be very difficult to identify what things are unsafe for myself because I live in my house. I want to know these are my things, I'm comfortable in them. And so I don't necessarily see them as dangerous where someone else coming in can see them as a potential fall risk, can see them as threatening. And so in this picture, you can see there's an area rug. You know, a lot of us, I like my rug, I have hard floors, but it could be an issue. So what are the things that we can do to change some of that and still feel comfortable in our house? As you're picturing your house, you also want to think about the outside of it, all right? So we have a ramp here on the left, and so typically we say ramps are great, but look at the condition of this ramp. This ramp in and of itself is a fall risk. There's a lot of issues with how it's been maintained, but it's no longer supporting. So what was installed maybe 10, 20 years ago to help improve our safety, we still need to examine those and ensure that we are doing what we can to keep ourselves as safe and those around us as safe as possible. Part of our safety is having the ability for people to come in if and when they need to. Now, the center picture there, you can see a door handle with a little box, and this is what we call a lock box. There's a code that you can enter, and the key to the house is inside of it. Most people are familiar with these for realtor access, but they are selling them now at Lowe's, Home Depot, a variety of places. And the benefit of having this box is that if it's accessible, then if 911's called and you're home and all your doors and windows happen to be locked, we don't have to try to break in. Now, the difficulty with the lockbox is that you do need to know the code and be able to pass that along when 911 is called. There is a way to enter that information into the premise information for dispatchers, so that's all internal for the fire department. But at least when you call 911, if you don't want to be handing it out, you can just say, hey, I do have a lockbox, there is a key, it opens the front door, it opens the side door, whatever door it opens, if you can come in through there. But when you do that, you need to give the dispatcher, whoever you're talking to, that code so we can gain access. And then you also want to look at that safety as you're walking into your house. So this happens to be the entryway into my house. And so I've got a couple little steps, one from the sidewalk onto the porch, and then another step from the porch into the house. Potentially fall issues, right? I've got leaves and debris. So just again, thinking of your house, what are the things that are making it a little bit more difficult or things that are a bit more concerning? There's a variety of toolkits out there, some of which have been shared through the previous 3 weeks of actual things to go around and look at, all right? How's the lighting in my house? How's my footing? How's my bedding? All of that type of stuff. One of the other safety things that we want to talk about is having a buddy system. So this buddy system, especially now with the current COVID situation we're in, is a little bit more important, at least from the emergency side of things. So I live by myself, and if I didn't show up to work one day, my coworkers would probably try calling me, they try to go out and find me. But if I didn't have someplace to be, or that I wasn't someplace all the time, having an ability to check in with someone and know what's going on is always beneficial. So the buddy system doesn't have to be a long, thorough conversation and I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z and planning out your whole day, but it's more of a, hey, I'm going to call Sally, and Sally knows that every day I'm going to call her at 10 unless we discuss something otherwise. And if she doesn't hear from me, she's going to wait an hour, try calling me, and then try calling my family, my friends, whoever it is. And then if no one has heard from me, either have my family come check on me or have call 911 and have put in a welfare check just to check on someone. The buddy system takes a little bit of communication as far as establishing when to talk about things and who to talk about things. And it's a safety mechanism just so that if an emergency happens, you know someone will go in and be able to find you if you happen to be unconscious or you happen to have fallen and you're not near a phone or anything like that. So just something to consider. I know a lot of different church organizations, faith systems, they have a buddy system in place, but it's good. You know, I know a lot of the participants in the local senior centers have been checking in on each other, which is great. And if you know someone who doesn't have any of that, you know, maybe consider starting one. Now, if you have a spouse or a roommate, whatever, that's living with you, you kind of have a built-in buddy system. Part of the other safety components, and I won't dwell too much on this as it's been discussed already, but things that we want to discuss with our doctor. Going in with a series of questions. I mentioned earlier that 911 gets called a lot for chronic issues, and they're seeking help, but they go to the ER and nothing's really resolved there because they don't have the history or the capability really to delve into deeper issues. So starting to develop a list of questions or a list of topics that you want to discuss with your doctor and kind of guide your appointments is important. Discussing if you have fallen is important. You know, just because you have fallen, you called 911, you went to the ER, your doctor doesn't know that information. And so we need to look at why that fall had occurred. It could be simple that you tripped over the dog, but it could also be more serious circumstances that led to that, and that needs to be investigated. We talked about foot impairment a couple weeks ago. You can also ask about in-home assistance. So your primary care physician has a number of resources that can help look at your current mobility and lifestyle to see if you qualify or if you need physical therapy or occupational therapy. You can also ask for in-home aid if you're just having difficulty doing some of the daily tasks because of fatigue or tiredness, which could also lead to the fall. And then you also want to talk to them about starting physical exercise or movement. We also want to talk to our pharmacist. Again, safety issues. Many of the individuals we run on are on 5, 6, 15 medications. They're not sure why they're on them, or if there's mixing, polypharmacy as they call it, mixing that's causing their falls. So really talking with your doctor about the medications, talking to your pharmacist about them, when to take them, if there's having issues. Those are all things that need to be considered. All right, and the last part of our brainstorming activity is to try something new. Last week, we looked at the evidence-based models to improve mobility and balance, and those are fantastic places to go. Trying something new could also just be taking a different route on your walk or doing something with your left hand instead of the right. Doing many different things that can keep your mind functioning in a slightly different way to improve your movement, to improve your balance, to keep you as safe at home as we can. The many people that we can reach out to for these brainstorming things include, dietitians, pharmacists. Like I said, your primary care is probably one of your biggest one, your physical therapist, your occupational therapists. The awesome thing about PTs and OTs is that they can also assess your home and help to make changes within that home. So when we talk about home modifications, I find many people are hesitant to request any of them because they see it as a lack of ability, right? If I need a grab bar in my bathroom to stand up, that means that I'm not going to be able to live on my own, or I don't have as much freedom. And I kind of want to shift that perspective in the sense that if we have that grab bar, it's keeping you more independent and active. Because what we find in the 911 system is that as soon as someone falls, the likelihood and recurrence of those falls greatly increases. So having things like grab bars in the bathroom, or a bed rail to help you get out of bed, or a small ramp to get into the house, or even just making smaller steps they're still big enough for your foot, but smaller so they aren't as high. Those things give us confidence. They empower us to keep doing what we need to and have the ability and freedom to stay in our homes. So now that we've brainstormed, we need to execute, right? Ideas are fantastic, but if we don't do anything about them, we need to, well, if we don't do anything about them, they're just ideas. So how do we execute? So the Vial of Life form I talked about, and like I said, we partnered with the Department of Senior Affairs, and I'm not quite sure if we were gonna be giving those out with lunches. Anna might know more than me on that, but definitely reaching out to the Department of Senior Affairs. You can reach out to me and I can get you a copy of that. The EMS DNR form can be obtained on the Department of Health website, and you can just look up EMS DNR form for New Mexico and it'll take you right there. Now your advanced directives, there's several different options out there. 5 Wishes is one of them. I know a couple of the senior centers were offering classes on those. I know that they also offer other classes on other types of advanced directives. If you are internet savvy or you have a loved one that is, you can just start looking it up. And it could also just be as simple as writing down some of your own wishes. So those are the executions. Those are the things that we want to do after our brainstorming. We want to go talk to our doctor. If we only think about our issues but we never talk to him, that's not going to help us. So we definitely want to execute with those capabilities. We also want to work on trying those new things. New things can be scary, but we want to work at doing that. But now we're getting into what to do when we actually fall. So I'm going to ask you all to sit with your feet firmly on the ground. And we're going to do a little bit of a breathing exercise. Now we're doing this sitting, but this can be anytime you fall, anytime you find yourself in a position of uncomfort, but you need to practice it before you know what to do. So we're going to have both feet on the ground. You're going to make sure you feel both of your butt cheeks on the chair. So we tend to feel or lean more on our right. So I want to make sure that you feel your left side. We're going to inhale through our nose. Your mouth is closed. The tongue is against the roof of the mouth. You're going to take a deep breath in. And then we're going to P-A-U-S-E. And then you're going to exhale as if through a straw. Good. We're going to do that again. We're going to breathe in. We're going to pause, P-A-U-S-E, and we're going to exhale as if through a straw. Good, one more. You're going to breathe in, pause, P-A-U-S-E, and exhale. Good. So by changing the way that we breathe, we can change and calm down our anxiety and kind of get ourselves from a fight or fight instance to more of a calming rest and digest, if you're aware of the nervous system. And so by just doing this first step of breathing, we can go from looking at where we are or being consumed with what just happened to where we need to go. And so this breathing style, for some people, you can actually find that you're a little dizzy or lightheaded, which is normal if you're not used to doing it. So learning to take those deeper breaths, calm down the nervous system, it increases the amount of oxygen to your brain and to your body. And so that's what helps calm down that nervous system. So that's the B in brave, is to breathe. So again, you want to lay there, close your mouth, inhale through your nose, exhale as if through a straw. It can be difficult, do your best, but that's really just going to help clarify the mind and what needs to happen next. So the R in brave stands for remain positive. When we remain positive, we're thinking of a solution. We're thinking of what needs to be done. You know, I can think of a solution, so that's one of the reasons why I'm positive. All right, the A in brave stands for assess your body. All right, so if you're sitting, you can do the sitting. If you find yourself on the ground, if you could roll onto your back, fantastic. If you can't, just do what you can. But right now, just move your ankles. Can you move your feet around? Is there pain or discomfort? We also want to move our knees and hips. How does that feel? And then move your lower back, your upper back, your wrists, your elbows, shoulders. Check your neck. We want to do this before a fall ever occurs so we know what our normal is. If I always have pain when I lay on my back, then if I fall out, that pain may be the same or it may be different. I also want to assess to see if there's blood, and if there is blood, where is it coming from? Our heads tend to bleed a lot. Now, there could be internal bleeding, which you won't be able to see, and that is a concern. So depending on where you fell, if you hit your head, these are some of the questions that 911 crews are going to come in and start asking you. So after you take that deep breath, you've kind of assessed who you are, you also want to think about your surroundings. Because again, you're going to have 4 to 10 people in your room asking you kind of questions, seeing what happened, what it is that just occurred. So you want to assess, are you inside? Are you outside? What time of day is it? Can anyone hear you? Did anyone see you fall if you're outside? Are they going to come for help? Is it the middle of the night and no one's around? Did you hit something on the way down? Did you hit the wall? Did you hit your head? Did you get dizzy? All of those things, and there's a big list here that we want to consider when we're assessing. And that's going to lead to the V, which is venturing to safety. So again, take a breath. Can you move? So if you happen to fall in the middle of the night on your way to the bathroom and you have a roommate or you have a spouse, they may or may not have already heard you fall. So that's a slightly different situation than if I fell in the middle of the night, I live alone, and I can't get help and I can't get up. So I may need to try to venture someplace to call for that help. So if I fell and I'm in my bedroom, that's going to be a different solution than if I'm outside. So when we do this class in person at the Department of Senior Affairs in the senior centers, we do a lot more hands-on of this part of the class, but just things to consider and things you can even practice while you're laying in bed. Can you roll from your left to your right? Can you get up onto your hands and knees? Can you sit up if you're laying down? Can you sit up without assistance of anything? And then can you scoot or crawl or be able to pull up on a stable object? Then we have the idea of engaging help. Now, I know some of the insurance companies, if you are a fall risk, their solution is just to get a medical alert button, which is a good solution, or at least a good part of the solution, but that's only part of it. Engaging help has more to do with kind of the long-term effects. But in the meantime, if I fell, I was able to crawl, I was able to get a phone because I do live by myself. I can call a family, friend, whatever. They can help get me up. They can help assess, if it's severe, they're like, ooh, you need to go to the emergency room. They can help get me there, but if they're not comfortable doing that, then that's what 911's for. All right, but this engaging help is at the time of a fall, but then it's also post-fall. So this is kind of a review of the Be Brave, and that is to brainstorm, execute, breathe, remain positive, assess body and surroundings, venture to safety, and engage help. These should be done before a fall, like I mentioned. The brave part is really for during a fall, and then after a fall, you want to revisit this, right? Has there been a change in your condition? There are kind of two pathways when you fall, right? If you're injured or you're not injured. If you're injured, calling 911, getting assistance, going to the emergency room is of high priority. There's a lot of different things that can be going on, and you may not be able to get yourself up. So having that safety net and knowing what to do when you have fallen and when you are injured is very important. Just as is it important to know when you're not injured. If you slid out of a recliner, that's not going to be as potentially threatening or potentially as injurious because you kind of slid in a controlled manner versus if you were walking and you suddenly got dizzy and fell over. And so learning to assess, learning to see what those issues are, and then going back to the scene of the crime, if you will, and assessing your home for, you know what, I probably shouldn't have 6 candlesticks in the middle of my hallway. That could lead to potential issue. Not that things are bad, it's just what can we do to make them better? And then whether you're injured or not injured, always follow up with your primary care. There's a misnomer that your primary care is there to take away your freedoms, and if you tell them about a fall, you're destined to, you know, have to go to an assisted living facility or a nursing facility. But they're there to work for you to give you the best possible health. And if that health involves changing medications or assessing things, being able to write a prescription for PT or OT or whatever the case may be, they can only do that if they have the information. The other thing to keep in mind, particularly when we talk about safety, and in the 911 system we see this often, is that people don't really understand that symptoms can grow over a period of time. So here in Albuquerque, we have a lot of hot air balloons, right? And it's amazing to see them come up, and then you can see their fullness once they're in the air. And symptoms can be like that, particularly if you're on any type of blood thinners or different medications. And so some of those symptoms that can start off small and kind of grow are confusion, right? So if you just start having a little bit more difficulty seeing what you're doing, remembering what you're doing, drowsiness, just feeling a little bit more sleepy. One of the biggest ones that we see are actually the confusion and the dizziness or weakness. And so, you know, Mr. Smith fell 3 days ago, seemed fine, but over the last 3 days, he's just having a little bit more difficulty walking around, having thought processes and being able to communicate isn't there. And so there's many other symptoms that can develop over a fall, but being aware of that, just because you don't have the symptoms right then and there, doesn't mean that they can't be growing, which is why we encourage you to do the Be Brave acronym multiple times, constantly assessing yourself, constantly knowing where you are, looking at your environment, looking at the people around you, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and that's going to create the biggest sense of safety in and around your home. And then it's also going to give you more comfort knowing that there is a plan, that your wishes will be followed through. If you call 911 and you go to Loveless, but Presbyterian's closer and we don't know which hospital you go to, we're going to take you to the closest one. And so that makes a lot of headache down the road for insurance coverage and things like that. So having the information available for the 911 providers, the firefighters, the paramedics, the EMTs, as well as having the information for yourself so you know when emergencies happen, it makes it a little bit more comforting. All right, so just remember, if a fall happens, you want to be brave. My email address is listed below, and I can also get you my office number, which is 764-3791. If there's any questions or things that come up later. But I think we have a few minutes for questions if there's any in the chat box.
So, hi, Athena. That was a very comprehensive and wonderful presentation from your perspective as a community paramedic. There are a couple of questions. So one of the questions, well, there are a couple about vial of life. So one is, if there are two older adults in the same household, should they have separate vial of lives, or can they combine that information together? Maybe I'll give you a couple of questions, then we can go on to some others. Another one, which is actually for me, what I have found as a home health physical therapist is some people are perfectly happy to have their vial of life posted on their refrigerator. Others do not want to be constantly reminded about their mortality. And so if they're putting it into their refrigerator or freezer, do you find in your experience that there's a best place to position that vial of life inside, securing it in some way, or hanging it, or it's better in the freezer, on the door, something, what's been your experience? So that we'll start with those two questions.
Sure. So for the vial of life forms, if you have more than one person, and I actually have a vial of life form for myself, so it's not just for older persons, but if you have more than one person in the house, you can put them in the same envelope or the same baggie, but you want to make sure that the demographics and the information separate. And one thing just to help with confusion, you can always include a photo of that person on the actual form, so that when we go in, it's not like, especially for some of us who have unusual names, like, is this Sally or is this Joe? And most of us can tell, but if for some of our residents who have more Spanish names or more foreign names, we may not know who's who. So having a photo of that person would be beneficial. And when it comes to sticking it inside of the refrigerator or freezer, typically the door is the best place. Whether you kind of tape it or just wedge it in, that's going to be easier than, in the very back behind everything. So anywhere that's kind of a little bit more accessible. And even if we just see the little bit of red sticking out, like I said, firemen are pretty nosy and we'll find what we need to if we know to look for it.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the chat is, what is your opinion as to why Albuquerque has so many more falls than Colorado Springs?
I'm not sure as far as falls in Colorado Springs. I know our call volume is definitely a concern, but I think a lot of it has to do with the awesome New Mexico mentality we have, that we're just going to keep doing what we can for as long as we can. And we're not as aware of making modifications and changes as we get older or as life changes. Stroke is one of the things I think of as the most as being a sudden life change where things have to alter. And in New Mexico or in Albuquerque, for better or for worse, we're kind of stubborn, and that I'm going to do what I'm going to do and no one can tell me otherwise. And so starting to help change that perspective and realize that people are there to help and keep you as safe and as active as they can is a mentality shift we haven't quite done yet.
Another question is, in your experience, when someone calls, an older person calls because they've had a fall and they have, responders come out, how often is the older adult aware that they have hit their head? The whole process can be confusing. And as you've mentioned, there could be 10 people crammed into the living room, which seems more than needed, but, sometimes there's a whole bunch of crews that show up at the same time. And so I think it might be interesting to understand or appreciate that under those circumstances, are people clearly seeing their own situation, or are there other factors that might be affecting, their whole perspective of what's going on?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I've worked in the field for 10 years before coming up here. And I would say for the most part, when we respond to falls, very few will admit that they've hit their head or hit anything. It's hard to say why. Some of it is just not remembering, right? So they can't tell me the events leading up to the fall, nor can they tell me what happened after the fall. They just know that all of a sudden we're there. And so that in and itself is concerning, but it also is concerning because they tend to tell us what we want to hear. We have a training to where we ask open-ended questions, but we're not the best at A, following through with that, and B, taking the time for letting people to answer. And so if you have someone who's a little bit more persistent and is just asking 10,000 questions, does your neck hurt? Does your feet hurt? Does this hurt? Da, 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 you're just going to answer no. And so did you hit your head? No. So in part, it's something that I'm working on with our field units to try and slow down to get a better assessment. And then just the overwhelming sensation of having the fall happen, and then B, 911 called and people show up. I find our older population tends to want to downplay that rather than let everyone know what's happening.
That's interesting to think about. I will point out that in the chat, there is some information that has, relevant to some of the presentation and also to questions. There's some information about upcoming Tai Chi programs that are being offered through the Department of Senior Affairs and the Department of Health. There are contacts there. These are free programs, and this is a way you've been learning along, through September. And then there are some opportunities that the Department of Senior Affairs and again, Department of Health have created so that you can take some next steps. You're learning, and now how can you put some of this information into kind of a next part of a plan for how you can improve your balance and be the best version of yourselves. Are there any other questions that maybe for some of you, if you're uncomfortable or unable to enter in the chat, that you might want to just unmute your phone or unmute your the Zoom? You can find that by looking at the lower left corner where there's a little microphone. If you're on a tablet, I think that mute button is towards the top. But if someone would like to just blurt out a question, feel free. And if two people speak at once, we'll get that sorted out.
Athena, I just wanted to comment. Thank you so much. Knowing people like you are out there to help us gives me a great deal of comfort. One of the best advices from an EMS guy that came to help my husband, because I was in shock. I had never called 911. He'd fallen, and you are exactly right. He said, "No, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. No, I'm fine." I'm like, "No, you're not." He said, "Please don't follow the ambulance. Please don't follow the ambulance. I know your husband's in there. Give me your phone. And I handed him my phone, and he said, I'm going to go to Google Maps. I'm going to put in the location of the hospital, and you just go by your phone. And that was the smartest, best advice I ever got. But thank you for what you do.
I'm glad you had a good experience, and that actually brings up a good point. If your loved one fell, now this is a little bit more complicated with COVID because they aren't really allowing people in the hospital, but when things kind of go back to normal is you don't have to go to the hospital with them right then, right, unless you have no other way of getting there. Because really what happens is they get triaged, they go through a bunch of things, and you're not going to be able to see them. You're just going to be waiting in the waiting room. So taking your time before you go down to the hospital, get yourself together. You know, if you need coffee, if you just need to take a deep breath, cry, do whatever it is, and then you can go down when things are a little bit more calm and you can actually see your loved one there.
That's very good advice. I will say there are many participants on the call today that have been attending the series, and I'm wondering if anyone wants to share any of their perspective about their experiences with these presentations, or pieces of information that seem particularly helpful, or even something that maybe was missing, or any kind of constructive feedback. So perhaps someone would like to share, their perspective and experience.
My name is Kathleen, and this has been excellent. What I wish is that we would have had this years ago when my dad kept falling. They lived in Rio Rancho, and I don't know how many times my sisters had to call the paramedics to get him up. And he was stubborn. And when he fell, he had to have PT at home. And he wanted to continue to leave his the thing by his desk. It's not a rug, it's a plastic thing to roll your chair back and forth. That's why one of the reasons he fell. And he wanted to keep it there. And the PT was very strong and said, no, you're not going to do this. And I hope that you could share this with the Rio Rancho Fire Department, because this would be very helpful for surrounding communities too.
Yeah, we're looking to hopefully partner with Rio Rancho, Bernalillo County, Santa Fe County, and really make this available statewide.
Yeah, that would be excellent. This is excellent. Like I said, I wish we would have had this years ago for him, but he's gone now. So, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, as I sit here watching your videos, I find myself doing toe curls, crunches, and the windshield wiper exercise, and working on my dorsiflexion. So it's so very easy to do it. It just has to become, it has become a habit for me as I sit. So thank you very much for the very informative series, and I'm feeling much more positive.
Thank you for sharing that, Richard. That's terrific. That's why we're all coming together and in doing what we're doing, is to help people again be the best versions of themselves, so you can get around, do what you want to do, and keep your independence and be free of injury. So that's terrific. Are there any other comments, things that people would like to share?
Janet, I had a couple of comments. Thank you so much, Athena. I had another meeting, so I didn't get the whole presentation, but I look forward to seeing it the recorded version that I'm going to do very soon. I wanted to thank you, and then also had a couple of questions. When you mentioned your partnerships, You mentioned some counties, but you didn't mention any tribes. Are you interested, or have you partnered with any tribes in the surrounding area? Or are you thinking about that in the future? And also, I was wondering, there are a number of elders that are starting to live in Albuquerque. The Indian population is actually growing a lot. And I wondered also how many people in your department or in your program are Native American, and if not, does your department get any cultural training for American Indians? Thank you.
So I would love to expand this to anyone who would have me, honestly. Reason why I mentioned those are just because those are some of my coworkers. I've gone through different trainings and programs with various firemen from those departments. But really, any tribal affiliations I think would be great, especially since I feel that they are underserved within our system. We do get some cultural training, but I don't know that it's enough. And the population in the tribal communities that we interact with, I don't want to say that they're negative, but there's a certain connotation with them. So that falls over just based on our experience with the type of calls we run and the locations that we're at. So expanding our cultural knowledge, I think, is very important. We have a huge refugee population as well, which we don't know much about, in part because they keep to themselves. And as our program, as HEART expands, trying to bridge those gaps and bridge those communities so that we can start to relay both sides of information, what the fire department's going to do, how we're going to do it, and then make it more acceptable and available for people of different cultures, and how we can blend that together, I think, is huge. So I'd be happy to talk more with you about this and get the program to any communities that you think could benefit from it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe, perhaps just doing some presentations to start off with and just making some connections. I think we could schedule right away a tribal coalition meeting that could just roll out your just meet and greet, talk with individuals. But I think it's so valuable what you're doing, and it's just needed. It's needed. So thank you for your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, then I guess this closes out our Fall Prevention Fridays series. And I'd like to thank Athena and all the previous presenters, and certainly on behalf of the New Mexico Falls Prevention Coalition, we certainly want to thank the Department of Health and the Department of Senior Affairs, who have helped to get the word out, to distribute educational information, to help with establishing some free virtual fall prevention classes coming up in any day now. So if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to the Department of Health. I can also put my email address in the chat. If you have any other kinds of fall prevention questions, I might be able to point you in the right direction. And it's been a pleasure, and everyone stay well and enjoy the fall, the beautiful weather coming that we so enjoy during the fall. So take care.
Thank you.